I was going to Vietnam to shoot a film on my family.
And I was going to Vietnam to shoot a documentary on my family.
And my name's Adele.
And my name's Adele.
And I'm half Vietnamese.
And I'm half Vietnamese.
And it was a little freakish because we were going to Vietnam at the same time, and it was just like, whoa, we need to make a film about this.
Yeah. And through the film, we found a lot of other people that share very similar stories, and it was really interesting building a community.
Can you define the word Hapa?
So the word Hapa today I think is commonly used to refer to people who are of mixed Asian descent. And that doesn't necessarily only include people who are white and Asian. It really refers to people who are Asian plus whatever other ethnicity.
When it came time to check boxes, I always automatically checked Asian, Pacific Islander, and Kim always automatically checked Caucasian.
But I think that also goes with how you identify when you look in the mirror.
Rolling, and then okay, and action. Be yourself.
I never fully fit in. I remember this one girl said to me when I was in elementary school, she said that my house smelled. And I was so offended, and I got really upset, and I didn't understand why she would say something like that, and it was kind of embarrassing for me. And then I realized it's because the food that my mother cooks and my grandmother's Vietnamese food is like fried food, so it's different spices and smells in a house that's not traditional, you know, American.
The smell of fried fish was something that I always smelled growing up in our garage, you know, in my friends' garages.
This is terrible. I remember being embarrassed about were spring rolls in my lunchbox and the fish sauce smell.
I mean, I would eat the food, and I mean, the language was always around me, and my mother always spoke Tagalog to us, and she made sure that, you know, that we wouldn't forget.
Very often when your looks don't necessarily match your DNA, you get put in these situations where you hear racism that's not meant for your ears.
I felt Filipino, and it was difficult not looking the way you feel. I think it was when I was about 5 that I recognized that I was really different, or maybe even earlier. I remember walking down the street, and I was with my mother, and someone had asked if she was my maid. And I would pray that, you know, I had a white mother, like with blonde hair and blue eyes.
And I also remember one thing I used to do in elementary school was I would go find makeup, and because I felt like my eyes were almond shaped, I would try to put makeup, because I thought I had this little thing right here, I would try to hide it so people wouldn't.
Really?
Because people made fun of us too, or made fun of me.
I remember actually, I was like, wow, this is like a bad performance art piece, because I was staring in the mirror being like, my eyes, I have half Asian eyes. And I actually wrote some piece which I have since thrown in the shredder because it was so awful, but...
The U.S., probably more than any other country, is really uncomfortable with hybridity or with people being more than one thing at the same time. And I think a lot of this has to do with the history, the racial history specifically of the United States, particularly this whole concept of the one-drop rule. The idea that if you have even one drop of black blood, that makes you just black.
I hadn't never really embraced the mixed race identity. Because the South, in Georgia, has a very strong black American culture. All the blacks were like, they shared what they learned growing up, which is, well, you have black blood in you, you're black. It was always a very secondary thing that they learned, but I would tell them I was born in Vietnam.
No, I was born in Vietnam. Yeah, I was born in Vietnam. My father is American, and then I was adopted.
In addition to just the outright racism that multiracial people face, just like other people of color, they also have to contend with a couple other types of racism. And one of them is what I call the racial spy experience.
Because I can be in a room with white people, and they'll say things about people of color that they would never say around people of color. And vice versa, I'd be in a room with people of color who would say things about people you know, who are white that they would never say around white people.
It really, I think, gets under your skin even more than the very direct stuff, because you realize that these are the conversations that are going on around you, but you just don't know about it.
My sister and I were both in strollers or something, and someone came up to them and I'm like, oh, Vietnamese, right? And he's like, hmm? And they're like, oh, you adopt these kids from Vietnam, you're such a nice person. He's like, well, thanks, but no, they're my kids. And they just kind of looked at him and they're like, oh, we understand you feel really close to them. And I'm like, he's like, no, they're my biological children. They just couldn't get their head around it.
As a racial spy, as a teacher for me, you can get in there and you can have more of an impact because you can say to that person, I know your world, but I also know the other side of the world.
I started the class by saying, let's come up with Asian stereotypes. And they let her rip, man. They let her rip. It was like crazy. I was like, man, you guys like know a lot of Asian stereotypes. Then I showed them a photograph. It's like this white guy with this Vietnamese woman sitting together, and I said, what is this? What is this picture? So he's like, he's older than her, he's taking care of her, she's a war bride, she's a prostitute, he's in the military, you know, all this stuff.
Wow.
And then I was like,
that's amazing.
Yeah, and then I was like, hey, folks, I'm half Vietnamese, and these are my parents. And then I was like, watch my film.
And this is kind of another parallel. When I meet people, they always think that my mom is the Asian one, and it's hard for them to get their minds around the fact that no, my dad was actually the Vietnamese refugee and a white woman actually decided to have children with him.
One thing that multiracial people have to deal with very often is this criticism. Sometimes it's direct, sometimes it's sort of implied, that they are not Asian enough. And I think that this can be a very painful thing because it really calls into question your very essence. You know, it's your own identity. One time of the year when I always felt like I was not Chinese enough was during Chinese New Year.
In 2004, when I went back to the Philippines, I guess what hurt me the most was that I was viewed as an outsider, even though I was coming home. And this was the country that I was born in, and I was raised in, and I could speak, but I mean, I was viewed as, oh, there's the American, there's the American.
You know, when we would go to our Vietnamese family, they would just, like, our uncle would give us a really hard time for being too white.
For being too white. You're so American. And
yeah, or he'd speak Vietnamese at us like this, and be like, psh, you guys are, you know.
Yeah,
oh, I get that too.
Yeah.
His wife would say, how much you weigh now? You big girl, how much you weigh now?
You're so
Why don't you say mop?
And I would say, that's a 4.
They're horrible people.
But that's also kind of the problem, like not feeling, you know, Asian enough, because then you know, there's guilt that goes along with that, or your parents make you feel like since you have all this opportunity, you should be a doctor.
If I'm hanging around predominantly Asian American friends, they say, oh, something about you being white. I'm like, I'm half, fuck off. It's just very casual in conversation. They're like, oh. I'm like, yeah, fuck you too. Damn monoracials, so fucking boring. You know, I mean, we'll joke about it.
When I meet Vietnamese people, the thing that we share is the emotional experience. I've had the emotional experience in Vietnam. I was taken from my homeland because the homeland just fallen apart in the war.
Another question I had is about keeping it real with who you choose to date, marry, procreate with.
Like the procreation side or the like race of your partner? I mean, I know they're connected, but yeah, okay. So dating is a very political thing because people really judge your politics and your loyalty by the race of your partner. Unless a multiracial person finds someone of the exact ethnic makeup as themselves, they are pretty much in an interracial relationship by default.
The most serious relationship I was with a Filipino immigrant woman, and she always made it a point to make fun of me when I was trying to speak Tagalog or, you know, sort of posture as really being Filipino. And so, yeah, there's this thing where, no, you're not immediately accepted.
You know, maybe one day there'll be a tribe of half Vietnamese people out there. And, you know, because I don't know too many people out there who can't marry somebody of their own composition if they wanted to. You know, how many half Vietnamese boys were there out there to meet born pre-1975? If I wanted to keep...
That's another thing I was kind of